I've gone on the record on this show last week, in fact, about the importance of the Director of National Intelligence. The DNI is a role that requires its holder to be well-versed in the intelligence community, diligent about facts, unbeholden to partisanship, and willing to tell the president the truth despite the consequences. Last week, the president named his ambassador to Germany, Richard Grenell, a man with none of those qualifications, as acting DNI. The appointment of Grenell might have been okay if Grenell was only going to stay until March 11th, as the law dictates. However, as I mentioned last week, Trump may be making a play using a loophole to keep Grenell in his position for much longer than that. And in order for Trump to keep Grenell in the acting DNI position past March 11th, Trump would have had to nominate a candidate who could never be approved by the Senate. Well, he's done exactly that. In true Trumpian fashion, the president nominated another candidate, one who is unlikely to be confirmed to this pivotal role. He's nominated Representative John Ratcliffe of Texas. So, who's Ratcliffe, and why would the president nominate him? Well, as we've seen through this presidency, Trump favors fealty and loyalty above all else, and Ratcliffe has shown that he's a willing pledge. Not what you want from someone in charge of our most sensitive intelligence matters. It's important to note, back in July of 2019, Trump actually tried to nominate Ratcliffe. Even Republicans at the time balked, not just at his lack of qualifications, but about the fact that he seems to have lied about his experience catching and convicting terrorists, which he seems to not have done at all. Again, not something you want from your intel chief. You and I now know DNI, the position is crucial. It requires a nonpartisan leader, which leads us once again to why. Why would Trump nominate a person lacking the qualifications for this crucial role? Well, it seems to take us back to Trump's obsession with loyalty and his distrust of intelligence officials. Since the start of his presidency, he has worked to undermine the intel agencies, slamming their work when he doesn't like what they say. For Trump to get the intel he wants, not the intel he needs, he's going to choose Richard Grenell, which brings us back to the loophole. By nominating Ratcliffe, Trump has been given Grenell's role as acting DNI new life, ensuring a win-win position for himself. If Ratcliffe gets confirmed, Trump gets his unqualified lackey. If Ratcliffe fails to get confirmed, Trump gets his unqualified lackey. Either way, the president will have exactly who he wants in the role, getting information tailored exactly how he wants it, which is great for him, but incredibly dangerous for you and me.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.